Everyone came to celebrate our engagement, except my parents. When I called, my mother just said, "We're celebrating your sister's promotion." I smiled and replied, "Then don't be surprised when you're not at the wedding." A week later, my father arrived at my door with a letter he should never have seen, asking, "Is this why you separated us?" I simply stepped aside and said, "Read it aloud." My name is Bruno, I'm 31 years old, and last fall I got engaged to the woman who truly transformed my life, Valeria. She's brilliant, empathetic, and has such a subtle sense of humor that it sometimes comes as a complete surprise. But most importantly, he never made me feel like I had to earn his affection. That part, though it may seem small, changes everything for someone like me, who grew up in an environment where even a gesture of affection seemed to have a price. In my family, everything, attention, recognition, affection, had to be earned. And no matter how hard I tried, it only took someone else to do the slightest thing to be relegated to the background again. That person was almost always my younger sister, Natalia. From a young age, Natalia was the star, the promise, the central figure. She gave piano recitals, got perfect grades, and was voted in her yearbook as most likely to become CEO. I wasn't a problem. I didn't rebel. I had good grades, I played soccer, I helped out at home. But it seemed like everything I did was barely a whisper compared to the constant spotlight on her. If I got a 92 on a science test, my mother would ask if Natalia had helped me study. If I landed the lead role in a school play, my father would suggest I ask my sister for stage presence tips because she had a great stage presence. I spent years trying to become someone worth seeing. I worked hard, earned a scholarship to a good university, landed a stable job in finance, and bought my own apartment. I thought that maybe, with all that, they'd start to see me as more than just an extra in Natalia's show. But every time I went back home, I still saw the same framed photos of her shaking hands with important people, newspaper clippings of her interviews, and those stories that always began with, "Did you hear what your sister did this time?" Still, I kept visiting them. Because, deep down, I clung to the idea that if I kept accumulating merit, being consistent, successful, and doing the right thing, they would finally do their part. Then Valeria came along. And she wasn't just my partner. She was the first person who truly made me feel like the main character. She asked me questions my parents never even considered. "What do you want? How did that make you feel? What are you proud of?" Being with her was like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for years. That's why, when I proposed under the willow tree where we had our first date, it wasn't just a step toward the future. It was, finally, finding a place and a person where I didn't have to prove anything to deserve love. We organized a simple but meaningful engagement party, surrounded by those who truly knew us as a couple. Friends from university, coworkers, Valeria's cousins, and even my best friend from childhood, Tomas, who flew in from Denver. We spent weeks choosing the venue, writing handwritten notes for each guest, and carefully putting together the music. I gave my parents and Natalia months' notice. My mother responded with a lukewarm, "We'll see what we can do." My father didn't say a word. Natalia just sent a thumbs-up emoji. Even so, I still held out hope. I even reserved a special table for them right up front. That table sat empty all night. They didn't send a message, a call, or even a last-minute excuse. I tried not to let that ruin the evening. But it's hard to raise a glass in front of 50 people and see that your own parents aren't there. You smile, you toast, you dance with the woman you love, but inside you feel like you're 12 again, wondering what you did wrong this time. The next morning, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, as if she'd been expecting my call. "Oh, we were busy celebrating your sister's promotion," he said. "Did you know she was named vice president at her company? It was a last-minute thing. The whole family was there. It was a very special night." I sat there silently staring at my phone, as if it had hit me in the face. I didn't scream. I didn't say anything hurtful. I just replied, "Then don't be surprised if he loses the wedding too." And I hung up. For the first time in my life, I didn't try to justify myself. I didn't wait for an apology. I simply walked away. A week passed. I didn't receive any messages, not even an attempt at explanation. The only thing was an Instagram post from Natalia, a carousel of pictures from her promotion party. Dinner with Catherine, a champagne toast, a group photo with the caption, "The best night ever. I love my people." I wasn't tagged. Neither was Valeria. My mother, however, appeared in 3 of the photos. Then, on Saturday morning, someone knocked on my apartment door. It was my father. He looked older, but not just because of his age. He had a tired expression, like someone who had just stumbled upon a truth he had avoided for years. In his hand, he held a folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper. The moment I saw it, I knew what it was. It was a letter I'd written 5 years earlier, one I'd never shared with anyone. I'd written it after a particularly tough Christmas, when the entire dinner party focused on Natalia's endless possibilities, while all they asked me was if I was still working in finance. I never printed it. I just saved it in a forgotten folder on my computer. But it was there. Printed copy, with parts underlined. I don't know how she found it. Maybe she still had access to a shared folder. Or perhaps Natalia found it, as she often did when they were children, rummaging where she shouldn't have. My father lifted the letter as if it weighed more than it appeared. His voice trembled. "Is that why you walked away?" I didn't answer. I just stepped aside and said, "Read it out loud." He stared at me for a long time. Then he came in. He unfolded the sheet slowly, as if it were a bomb he had to defuse. And she began to read. At first, her voice faltered, caught between shame and doubt. But the words came out nonetheless. "Dear Mom and Dad," she began. "This isn't a letter I plan to send, because I already know what you'll say. That I'm exaggerating, that I'm too sensitive, that once again I'm making it all about me. But I need to write it down, even if it's just so I can say it once, without being interrupted or told I'm exaggerating." And that's where it stopped. I didn't say anything. It wasn't necessary. I always knew Natalia was your favorite. You never said it out loud, but you didn't need to. It was obvious in your eyes when she walked into the room, in how your face lit up involuntarily. I saw it in the way you showed her off to everyone, even while I stood just a few steps away holding news you never bothered to ask about. It was in every detail. You remembered her achievements, but forgot mine. You were always there to accompany her, without fail, while I was left to wait for you, or simply accept that you weren't coming. And if you did come, it was out of obligation. With effort, I watched him swallow hard. His fingers trembled as he held the sheet of paper, as if it might slip away at any moment. He continued reading. "There's a kind of loneliness that creeps in even when you're surrounded by people with the same last name. That feeling of being a stranger among your own kind stayed with me for years. At every party, at every family meal. Always silent, while all eyes and words revolved around him, as if I weren't there. You didn't build a wall between us. You simply never opened the door for me." My father shifted in his armchair. He seemed to want to speak, but he didn't. He returned his gaze to the paper. "You'll probably say I should be happy for Natalia, that she's worked hard, that she deserves everything she's achieved. And yes, I am happy for her. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt to be invisible. It doesn't mean I didn't grow up trying to earn something you gave her unconditionally. Your attention, your pride, your love." Her voice broke as she reached that last word. He didn't seem prepared for how raw the text was, how silently devastating it was. He looked at me again. This time his expression had changed. It wasn't pity or defensiveness. It was more like a belated understanding, or the realization that that understanding was no longer of much use. I didn't console him. I didn't tell her she was okay, because she wasn't. She looked down again. "I don't need tributes. I don't want applause. I just want to feel that you see me, that you know who I am. But I've spent 3 decades waiting for that moment, and I've come to understand that it's not going to come. So I'm letting go. Not out of resentment, but out of respect for myself. If you ever wonder why I'm pulling away, why I've stopped calling, why I've stopped pretending it doesn't hurt, let this letter be your answer. Because I can no longer keep knocking on a door that only opens when Natalia isn't there. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. My father didn't say a word for what seemed like an eternity. He stood still, his eyes moist and his mouth slightly open, like someone trying to piece together a sentence from the wreckage of his certainties. I didn't know, he finally murmured. Didn't you know? I replied softly. Or maybe he didn't want to know. It's not the same thing. He nodded. First once. Then more slowly. Your mother hasn't seen this. I raised my eyebrows. And would that change anything? He was surprised. I didn't say it cruelly, but I was no longer willing to soften the truth. Not after so many ignored birthdays. Not after so many times I was just a footnote. She sighed long and deeply. Your mother and I love you, Bruno. Do you love the version of me who doesn't ask for anything? I answered in a whisper. A treasure trove that applauds for Natalia, that doesn't complicate things, that doesn't complain even when ignored. I watched him age before my eyes. As if guilt had suddenly surfaced, not dramatically, but wearily, inevitably. I shouldn't have let it get this far, he said. I should have noticed. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You were busy celebrating. He shuddered. This time I didn't let the silence grow too long. I didn't bring you here to hurt you, Dad. I just needed you to know. Because I'm not going to pretend anymore. Valeria and I are building something new, something healthy. I'm not going to drag that into a place where I still have to fight to be seen. She looked at the letter again. Her fingers folded it carefully, as if it were something fragile. I could see she wanted to talk, to explain herself, to apologize, maybe even beg. But something in the way she stood made me understand that she knew that moment hadn't come yet. That the damage wasn't sudden, but a silent accumulation. And that can't be fixed with a sad conversation and a sheet of paper filled with remorse. And just as he turned to leave, he asked, in a voice that sounded like a child's, "Am I invited?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted her to feel the weight of her question. To understand that nothing was automatic anymore. That invitations, like respect, like affection, were earned. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I just looked him in the eyes and said, "We'll see." And I closed the door. Not angrily. Firmly. For days have passed since then. I haven't received a single call from him. Or from my mother. But last night, Natalia posted a new photo. A family dinner. My parents, her, some cousins. The caption read, "Surrounded by those who truly matter." And with that, I knew what to do. This morning, I stared at that picture longer than I'd like to admit. Not because it surprised me. By now I knew perfectly well where I stood. But it confirmed something I'd been trying to accept for months. They're not going to change. Not because of a wedding. Not because of a letter. Not even for me. And yet, it hurt in a way I didn't know how to put into words. I showed it to Valeria while we were on the sofa, coffee in hand, the morning sun streaming through the window as if nothing could possibly be wrong. She looked at her. Then she looked at me. Are you okay? I nodded. One of those gestures that really means no, but you're tired of explaining it. I thought maybe the letter would do some good. I murmured. He probably did, I replied gently. Just not in the way you expected. I put my phone down and rubbed my eyes. He was no longer angry. And that, strangely enough, was the oddest thing of all. There was no trace of fury left, only a kind of serene, cold, definitive clarity. I wasn't a kid seeking approval. I was a man deciding who deserved to be in the life I was building. That night, I did something I'd been putting off for weeks. I opened the spreadsheet we used to organize the wedding, guest list, seating chart, food preferences, addresses, and looked for the section dedicated to family. There they were, my mother, my father, Natalia. I stared at their names for a long time. Without drama or ceremony, I simply deleted them. I pressed delete. Valeria, sitting across the table reviewing Katerin's budgets, said nothing. She only looked up when she noticed me watching her. She nodded, without a word. That silent gesture, her understanding without questions, made me feel more seen than at any toast or family gathering. But of course, that wasn't the end. 3 days later, my cousin Jen called. She was one of the few family members I still spoke to regularly. She had never gotten involved in dramas, taken sides, or made me feel like I had to compete for attention in a house that always seemed to have enough affection for one child, but never for two. "Hi," she said cautiously. "Can I ask you something weird?" "Sure. Is it true you didn't invite your parents to the wedding?" I paused before answering. "It's not that you uninvited them. I simply didn't send them an invitation." "That's not the same thing," she sighed. "Well, the thing is, they're saying you're completely cutting them out of your life. Your mom called mine, crying, and Natalia's going around saying you're doing all this for attention." I let out a dry laugh. Of course, that old speech. "I do it for peace, not for attention," I replied. "It's just the opposite." "I understand," he said quickly. "I just wanted to warn you. People are starting to say things in the groups. Some people are wondering if I should still attend the wedding if there's going to be drama." "They're adults," I said. "They can decide for themselves." Jen hesitated for a second. "You know this is going to blow up more than it needs to, right?" I nodded. "It already has." We hung up shortly after. I wasn't upset with her, I appreciated her honesty, but she left me with a strange feeling that I couldn't immediately define. It wasn't guilt, nor remorse. It was that unease that creeps in just before a storm breaks, when the sky is unnervingly quiet and the air smells of something about to shatter. And it arrived the next morning. It wasn't an email, or a voicemail. It was a letter. A real letter, handwritten in my mother's rounded handwriting on thick, ivory-colored paper with the family crest embossed on it. The kind she used for Christmas cards or condolence notes. Valeria was the one who found it in the mailbox first. She didn't open it. She just handed it to me with an expression that clearly said, "Be careful." I sat down at the kitchen table and slowly opened it. The paper rustled in that pretentious way that tries to impress. I read the first few lines and then stopped. It wasn't an apology. It was a defense. A long, embellished explanation about everything they had sacrificed for me in my childhood, how difficult it was to raise two such different children, how much they always tried to do the right thing, and how unfair it was of me to punish them for doing what they thought was best. According to her, Natalia was simply more demanding and needed more visible support. That didn't mean they didn't love me, just that I had always been more independent. Phrases like, "We're sorry if you ever felt excluded," or "maybe we could have done some things differently. But it hurts that you punish us now," was the constant refrain. I folded it before I finished. Not because it was too much, but because it was exactly what I expected. Not a word about the engagement party they ignored. Not a mention of the letter my father read aloud in my living room. Not even a simple, "We hurt you and we're sorry." I set the letter aside and didn't mention it for the rest of the day. Valeria didn't ask any questions. She simply reached out and gently took my hand. That night, with my laptop open and the cursor blinking over a new email, I hesitated. I didn't know if I should reply. But then I remembered something I had written in the original letter, the one my father read aloud. A line I'd forgotten. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for presence." And I knew what I had to do. Not for revenge, nor to make a statement. I did it to let go. To accept that sometimes the people who raise you aren't the same ones who truly see you, and that walking away doesn't make you cruel. It makes you free. So the next morning I wrote one last message. It wasn't long. I didn't try to relive the past or justify my decisions. I'd already done too much of that in my life, trying to hold up a mirror to people who refused to look. This time I wrote clearly, for myself and by myself, not for them. Mom, Dad. I've read your letter. And I think they genuinely believe they did the best they could. But I also think their version of best left me feeling invisible for a large part of my life. I'm not writing this to argue about what happened, or to compare who needed it more, or to shift blame. I just want to tell you this. I'm no longer going to wait for you to love me the way I asked for it, calmly, clearly, unconditionally. I'm no longer going to measure my worth against Natalia, or try to earn a place in a family where I've always been a shadow. Now I have a new family. One that I chose, and that also chose me. And although it's hard for me to say, they won't be at the wedding. I wish them all the best, truly. But from now on, I need to distance myself. Not to punish them, but to protect myself, finally. I wasn't expecting a reply. And I didn't get one. 2 days passed, then 5, and then a week. The silence, far from being painful, became a relief. As if a constant noise that had been there for so long I no longer even noticed it had finally stopped. But it still weighed on me. For the first time in a long time, I slept soundly. I breathed weightlessly. I laughed for real. Not that polite laughter you force at family dinners, but a real, hearty laugh, brought on by people who made me feel safe. The wedding was a month away, and Valeria and I were immersed in the final details. The guest list was already finalized. The place was a restored old greenhouse on the outskirts of the city, covered in climbing ivy and with glass walls that captured the sunset like a stained glass window. A space filled with light, and that made sense, because this stage of my life wasn't about escaping darkness, but about entering something much brighter. My best friend, Tomas, would be my godfather. Jean, who has known me since childhood, agreed to officiate the ceremony. He was always one of the few people in my extended family who never made me feel like a supporting actor in my own story. Valeria's parents welcomed me as if I were already one of them. Her mother even joked once, "Sometimes we like you better than she does." On the morning of the wedding, I looked at myself in the mirror as I buttoned my shirt. My hands were steady, without trembling. I thought I'd be more nervous, but I wasn't. Everything felt just right, as if every step I'd taken, even the most painful ones, had led me precisely to that moment. Hours later, I was under the roof of flowers and glass, with the sun setting and bathing everything in gold. Then Valeria appeared in a dress that stopped time. I heard nothing, not the music, not the guests, not even the wind in the trees. Only her. When he reached my side, he took my hand and whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded. More than okay. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt, and beautiful. When Jenny read a quote we had chosen together, I felt a lump in my throat. The family you build is always stronger than the one you were born into. Because it's a choice, not something imposed. I saw some guests looking at me intently, as if they understood the message. I didn't flinch. I just squeezed Valeria's hand tighter. We exchanged vows. We kissed. And the greenhouse filled with applause, laughter, and love. In that moment, I didn't just receive a new last name. It was more than that. It was the true beginning of a new life. But of course, these stories almost never end without one last surprise. 3 days after the wedding, while Valeria and I were packing for our honeymoon, my phone rang with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Minutes later, a message arrived. "You didn't even tell us the date. You didn't even give us a chance." It was Natalia's. I stared at the screen for a moment and then showed it to Valeria. She read it, raised an eyebrow, and asked, "Are you going to answer?" I shook my head. There was no need. That message said it all, unintentionally. The truth is, they had 30 years of opportunities. I was there, time and time again, with an open heart. I invited them to school functions, graduations, dinners at my house. I called, visited, asked, waited. And the day I stopped begging for crumbs and started building my own table, only then did they notice my absence. I remembered something a friend once told me. When you stop playing the game others invented to keep you small, they'll call you selfish for abandoning the board. Let them say it. We left the next day. 2 weeks in Greece, far from everything. I didn't check my email. I didn't read family chats. I didn't wonder what they were saying. I just lived. We walked along the cliffs of Santorini, toasted with wine at sunset in Naxos, swam in coves so blue they seemed otherworldly. One night, on a terrace wrapped in blankets gazing at the stars, Valeria asked me softly, "Do you ever think about going back?" "Go back to where?" I said, confused. He clarified to them. I kept thinking about it. I really did. And for the first time, I didn't feel that pull in my chest, that need to be understood. It was gone. Or perhaps it was still there, but I no longer had control. I looked at her, smiled, and said, "No, I think I've finally arrived where I was meant to be." When we returned, life didn't turn into a fairy tale. The payments kept coming, the work continued, and every now and then there were awkward conversations with distant relatives. But something inside me had changed. I no longer measured myself by those who never took the time to get to know me. He didn't spy on her social media. He didn't try to fix what was broken. He just moved on. The holidays passed. We celebrated Christmas with Valeria's family, playing board games, laughing, and with wrapping paper scattered all over the living room. My parents didn't send a single message. And, to be honest, that silence was the best gift they could have given me. Not because it proved anything, but because, finally, it stopped mattering. Yen kept writing to me. She showed her mother photos of our wedding, and her mother, she said, was moved to tears and told her, "You look happy." Yen mentioned it to me tenderly, but I just nodded. I didn't need them to understand anymore. I spent my life wishing they would. Now I was busy living the life I once only imagined. A yen of genuine affection, of chosen connections, and of a calm that needs no explanation. Sometimes people ask me if I think I'll ever reconcile with my family. My answer remains the same. I've made peace with the past, but I don't owe it my future. Because, in the end, this story wasn't about them. It was about me. And about the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen, and chose myself.